On my 65th birthday, my son whispered to his wife, "I'll distract her, you go to her house and change the locks." I heard them. 40 years as a principal teaches you to listen to the whispers, not just the shouts. When she came back, she froze and gasped. "Something went wrong, your mother." "Oh, something went wrong, all right. Just not for me. Let me tell you who they thought I was, and who I really am. Because my son Kevin, at 40 years old, never knew the truth about his mother. And my daughter-in-law Tiffany, she was about to learn a lesson far more valuable and far more costly than any luxury property she'd ever sold." Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. To Kevin, and certainly to his relentlessly ambitious wife, Tiffany, I was always just Brenda Jackson, Mom, the widow, the retired principal, a sweet, perhaps slightly naive woman who'd spent her life managing unruly middle schoolers, and was now quietly living out her golden years on a modest pension. They saw the simple, well-kept bungalow I'd shared with my late husband George for nearly 4 decades. They saw the sensible sedan I drove. They saw the comfortable but certainly not fashionable clothes I wore. They saw a life lived within careful, predictable boundaries, a life respectable enough perhaps, but utterly unremarkable in their world of luxury real estate deals and 6-figure tech salaries. What they didn't see, what they never bothered to look closely enough to see, was the reality behind the title principal. They didn't see the woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of school board politics for 35 years, who had balanced multi-million-dollar budgets with razor-thin margins, who had stared down furious parents, mediated bitter staff disputes, and made tough, unpopular decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Every single day, they saw a gentle, soft-spoken older woman. They never saw the strategist, the negotiator, the crisis manager. They never saw the steel spine forged in decades of quiet, relentless dedication. And they certainly never saw the numbers. George and I, we were cut from the same sensible cloth. We lived well below our means. Always. His engineering salary was steady, my principal's salary respectable. But more than that, we were savers, meticulous, disciplined savers and quiet, cautious investors. While Tiffany and Kevin were leasing luxury cars and buying houses they couldn't truly afford, I was maxing out my retirement accounts, diverting portions of my salary into index funds, reinvesting dividends. I managed my finances with the same quiet, analytical rigor I used to manage my school, looking for long-term stability, not short-term flash. When George passed away 2 years ago, the life insurance payout was substantial. Combined with our decades of disciplined saving and the surprising growth of some tech stocks I'd bought on a whim in the early 2000s, thanks to a tip from a former student who became a Silicon Valley whiz kid, I always listened to the smart ones. My nest egg wasn't just comfortable, it was formidable. I was a multi-millionaire, living the quiet life of a pensioner. I never told Kevin. Why would I? George and I had raised him to value hard work, integrity, and character, not bank balances. We wanted him to make his own way, to feel the pride of his own achievements. Revealing my wealth felt like undermining the very lessons we had tried so hard to teach him. Tiffany, however, was a different species altogether. A high-end real estate agent obsessed with appearances, she moved through the world as if it were a glossy magazine spread. She married my gentle, easily influenced son and immediately began upgrading his life. A bigger house in a more pretentious neighborhood, flashier cars, designer clothes. She viewed me, I could tell, with a mixture of pity and barely concealed contempt. I was the embarrassing working-class mother-in-law, a potential smudge on her perfect branded existence. And my house, my modest but sturdy bungalow in a neighborhood that was rapidly, unexpectedly becoming prime real estate due to gentrification. She looked at it not as my home but as an underperforming asset ripe for the picking. Her eyes practically glittered when she talked about comps in my area. My 65th birthday arrived, not with the gentle warmth I might have hoped for in my first year as a widow, but with the slightly frantic, performative energy that seemed to define Tiffany's entire existence. Kevin called, his voice lacking its usual easy affection, replaced by a strained cheerfulness. "Hey Mom, happy birthday. Tiff and I want to take you out for lunch." Our treat. The treat, it turned out, was a noisy, garishly decorated chain restaurant, the kind with laminated menus sticky from previous patrons and servers forced to wear embarrassingly themed uniforms. It was precisely the sort of place Tiffany would normally shudder to be seen in, which told me everything I needed to know about the level of genuine celebration involved. This wasn't about honoring me, It was about checking a box, fulfilling an obligation with minimal effort and expense. We sat at a wobbly table near the overflowing bus station, the air thick with the smell of stale fryer oil and synthetic cheese. Tiffany spent the entire meal glued to her phone, scrolling through Instagram, occasionally murmuring, that's nice, Brenda, without looking up. Kevin fidgeted nervously, daring to fill the awkward silences with forced, overly loud anecdotes about his work, mid-level management jargon that meant nothing to me. I maintained my polite, observant facade. Years of dealing with difficult parents during tense parent-teacher conferences had taught me the power of quiet observation. Let them reveal themselves. The gift, when it came, confirmed my assessment. It was a small, gaudily wrapped box, containing a bottle of cheap, cloyingly sweet perfume. The kind given away as a free gift with purchase, at department store makeup counters. It was still in its promotional cellophane. Clearly it had been sitting in Tiffany's closet for months, a forgotten piece of consumer detritus repurposed for this obligatory occasion. Happy birthday, Mom Brenda. Tiffany chirped, finally looking up from her phone, her smile as bright and empty as the restaurant's fluorescent lighting. Hope you love it. I thanked them, my voice carefully neutral. I didn't love it. I didn't even like perfume. It gave me headaches. A fact my own son, if he were paying attention, would have remembered. But Tiffany wasn't interested in my preferences. She was interested in the performance of gift-giving, the gesture itself, however hollow. As the waitress cleared our barely touched plates of greasy food, I felt a familiar weary sadness settle over me. This was my son. This was the life he had chosen. A life of surfaces, of performance, where even a mother's birthday was just another scene to be managed. Another box to be checked before rushing back to the real business of curating their perfect, empty lives online. But beneath the sadness, something else was stirring. A cold, quiet alertness. The principal in me, the one who could smell trouble brewing from 3 corridors away, was beginning to pay very close attention. The forced cheer, Kevin's nervousness, Tiffany's distraction. It felt less like indifference and more like strategy. This wasn't the first time Tiffany's behavior had pinged my internal radar. My suspicions hadn't sprung fully formed from a regifted bottle of cheap perfume. They were the result of a slow accumulation of data points, subtle probes, and carefully worded questions she had been deploying for months, ever since George passed and my perceived vulnerability increased. Tiffany, the luxury real estate agent, had developed an almost obsessive interest in my modest bungalow. It wasn't the house itself she cared about. I knew she considered it hopelessly outdated, practically a teardown. It was the land. My quiet tree-lined street, once a haven for working-class families, was undergoing a rapid, almost violent transformation. Developers were circling like sharks, buying up the older homes, bulldozing them, and erecting minimalist monstrosities that sold for astronomical sums. My little patch of earth, the place George and I had poured 40 years of love and sweat into, had become, in Tiffany's world, a prime piece of marketable real estate. Her comments started subtly, usually dropped into conversation with a practiced, casual air. Wow, Brenda, property values around here are just skyrocketing, she'd remarked one afternoon while visiting, her eyes scanning my backyard not with appreciation for my roses, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a surveyor. Did you see what the Miller's old place sold for? Unbelievable. Then came the gentle suggestions, wrapped in layers of false concern. This big house must be a lot for you to manage all alone now. Brenda, she'd sigh, looking around my perfectly tidy living room as if it were a scene of overwhelming squalor. All the cleaning, the yard work, it must be exhausting. My house wasn't big. It was a comfortable, manageable 3-bedroom brick bungalow, and I enjoyed the yard work. It kept me active. But Tiffany wasn't interested in the reality. She was building a narrative, the narrative of the frail, overwhelmed widow burdened by a property she could no longer handle. The suggestions became more direct. Have you ever thought about maybe downsizing? She'd asked one day, flipping through a high-end real estate magazine she'd conveniently left on my coffee table. There are some lovely condo developments going up near us. Maintenance-free living, pools, gyms. It would be like being on permanent vacation. You could free up some capital, have a nice little nest egg to enjoy your retirement. Free up capital, a nest egg. Her language was always transactional. She saw my home not as the repository of my life's memories, but as trapped equity, an asset waiting to be liquidated. I deflected her probes politely but firmly. I'm perfectly happy here, Tiffany. This is my home. Her frustration, though usually masked by a bright smile, would flicker in her eyes. She saw my attachment to my home not as sentimental but as stubborn, irrational, perhaps even senile. How could anyone choose to live in a small old house when they could cash out and move into a sterile, anonymous condo? It didn't compute in her world of constant upgrades and relentless acquisition. These conversations, initially dismissed as Tiffany's typical status-obsessed chatter, began to form a disturbing pattern in my mind. The principal in me, the one trained to spot subtle manipulations and hidden agendas, started paying closer attention. Her interest felt too keen, too persistent. It felt less like concern and more like reconnaissance. She wasn't just suggesting, she was assessing, gauging my defenses, looking for a weakness. It was after one particularly probing conversation about whether I had updated my will since George's death, a question so crassly premature it took my breath away, but I decided to take proactive measures. My suspicions were still just suspicions, but 40 years of dealing with scheming adolescents and ambitious administrators had taught me the value of preparedness. Trust, but verify, and always have a contingency plan. Back at the sticky table of the generic chain restaurant, the birthday celebration lurched towards its awkward conclusion. The waitress cleared away the plates, leaving behind a scattering of crumbs and the lingering scent of disappointment. I was preparing my polite exit speech, eager to retreat to the quiet sanity of my own home, when Kevin suddenly launched into what I would later recognize as Operation Distraction. He leaned forward, his face arranged in an expression of forced, overly enthusiastic nostalgia. "Hey Mom," he exclaimed, his voice a little too loud, drawing the attention of the bored couple at the next table. "Remember how we used to go to Willow Creek Park all the time when I was a kid? After school? We should do that. Let's take a walk through the park for old time's sake. It's right near your house." Willow Creek Park. It was indeed near my house, but crucially it was in the opposite direction from the road I would normally take home. A walk there would add at least an hour, probably more, to my afternoon. Tiffany immediately jumped in, playing her supporting role. "Oh, Kevin, what a wonderful idea," she gushed, clapping her hands together with the artificial delight of a game show hostess. "A lovely birthday walk, Mom Brenda. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a directive, wrapped in the guise of a spontaneous, heartwarming suggestion. I looked from my son's overly eager face to my daughter-in-law's bright, false smile. The strategy was clumsy, almost insultingly transparent. They needed to keep me occupied. They needed to keep me away from my house for a specific predetermined window of time. Why? The answer clicked into place with a cold, sickening certainty. The locks. Tiffany's previous failures to persuade me to sell must have led her to a more direct approach. She couldn't convince me to leave my house, so she was planning to lock me out of it. The audacity of it, the sheer cold-blooded cruelty of plotting to seize her own mother-in-law's home on her birthday, was staggering. But the principal in me, the part that had seen the surprising depths of human pettiness and greed, wasn't entirely surprised. Disappointed, yes. Heartbroken, certainly, but not surprised. I decided in that instant to play along. Arguing would only make them suspicious. Resisting would only delay the inevitable confrontation. No, the best strategy was to let them believe their plan was working perfectly. Let them walk confidently into the trap they didn't even know existed. "A walk?" I said, arranging my face into a look of mild, pleasant surprise. "Why, Kevin, that sounds lovely. I haven't been through Willow Creek in years." The relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. Kevin visibly relaxed, his forced smile becoming slightly more genuine now that his task was seemingly accomplished. Tiffany gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The first phase of their pathetic little coup was underway. "Great," Kevin boomed, already sliding out of the booth. "Let's go. It's a beautiful afternoon." As we walked out of the restaurant, leaving Tiffany to settle the bill and undoubtedly make her escape, I felt a strange mixture of profound sadness and icy resolve. My son, my own child, was actively participating in a plot to render me homeless, but instead of crumbling, I felt a familiar steely strength rise within me. They thought they were leading me on a nostalgic walk. They had no idea they were marching straight into a carefully prepared ambush. The quiet, retired principal was about to teach her final, most important lesson, and the tuition would be devastatingly high. As Kevin enthusiastically steered me towards the restaurant exit, practically bubbling with forced nostalgia about Willow Creek Park, Tiffany executed her part of the plan with the smooth, practiced timing of a seasoned con artist. She made a show of gathering her expensive handbag and sunglasses, then glanced dramatically at the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist, a gift no doubt from one of her high-commission closings. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, her voice a perfect imitation of sudden flustered realization. "Is that the time already? I completely forgot." Kevin and I paused, turning back towards her. Kevin's expression was one of mild rehearsed surprise. Mine, carefully concealed, was one of cold, clinical observation. "Forgot what, babe?" Kevin asked, playing his part. "My showing, the penthouse suite at the Azure. I have a potential buyer flying in from Dubai. Huge client, the appointment is in 30 minutes, and it's clear across town. I have to dash." It was a beautiful performance. The name-dropping of the exclusive building, the mention of the international client, the manufactured urgency, all designed to reinforce her image as a high-powered, in-demand real estate mogul, while simultaneously providing the perfect excuse for her swift departure. She rushed over and gave me a quick dry air kiss somewhere in the vicinity of my cheek. "Brenda, I am so terribly sorry to run out on your birthday lunch like this," she said, her voice dripping with insincere regret. "Duty calls, you know how it is." I did in fact know how duty called. It rarely involved abandoning family for a commission. She turned to Kevin, giving him a quick, meaningful glance. "Honey, you'll take good care of Mom Brenda, won't you? Make sure she has a lovely walk." It wasn't a request, it was an instruction, a reminder of his assigned task. "Of course, Tiff," Kevin replied, his voice full of supportive understanding. "Don't worry about us. Go close that deal." Tiffany flashed him a brilliant, grateful smile, then turned back to me one last time. "Happy birthday again, Brenda. We'll celebrate properly soon." Another blatant lie. She grabbed her keys from the table, her movements sharp and purposeful, and practically sprinted out of the restaurant towards the valet stand, her high heels clicking an urgent staccato rhythm on the polished floor. I watched her go, a predator leaving the scene of the crime to secure her alibi. She hadn't even offered me a ride home first, despite knowing my house was in the opposite direction of her supposed appointment. The logistics didn't matter, only the objective mattered: get to Brenda's house while Kevin kept her occupied. Kevin watched her go too, a look of almost puppy-like admiration on his face. He truly believed she was a force of nature, a brilliant businesswoman conquering the world. He couldn't see the cheap, manipulative tactics, the utter lack of genuine empathy, the cold, hard avarice that drove her. He was blinded by the glittering facade, just as she intended. "Wow," he breathed, shaking his head as if in awe. "She's really something, isn't she?" "Yes, Kevin," I replied quietly, my voice carefully neutral. "She certainly is." He seemed to take my agreement at face value. He turned back to me, his nostalgic tour guide persona snapping back into place. "Right then, Willow Creek Park awaits. Ready for a trip down memory lane, Mom?" "Lead the way, son," I said, my voice gentle, my mind already calculating the timing, the distance, the window of opportunity Tiffany now had. Everything was proceeding exactly according to their plan, which meant everything was proceeding exactly according to mine. The walk through Willow Creek Park was an exercise in strained nostalgia. Kevin, bless his misguided heart, tried his best. He pointed out the old oak tree where he'd supposedly had his first kiss. A story I knew for a fact involved a different park and a different girl entirely. He reminisced about the Little League games played on the dusty baseball diamond. He talked loudly, filling the quiet afternoon air with a constant stream of manufactured memories. Clearly terrified of allowing a moment of silence where I might actually think, or worse, question the purpose of this sudden forced march down memory lane. I played my part. I nodded. I smiled faintly. I made the appropriate murmurs of vague recollection. Inside, however, my mind was a whirring calculator. Tiffany had left the restaurant just after 1:30 p.m., allowing for traffic. She would arrive at my house around 2 p.m. A professional locksmith could change 2 deadbolts in 30 minutes. Maybe 45 if they were thorough. She would need time to meet him, give instructions, make payment. I estimated her mission would be complete by 2:45 p.m. at the latest. Kevin's job was to keep me occupied away from the scene of the crime until at least 3 p.m., preferably later. He kept checking his watch, a subtle nervous tick he probably didn't even realize he was doing. He steered me towards the longest possible route around the park's perimeter, his chatter becoming increasingly frantic as the minutes ticked by. Then, right on cue, His phone rang, he pulled it out, glanced at the screen and his face flooded with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Oh shoot, Mom," he said, feigning annoyance. "It's work. My boss. I have to take this. You know how he is." He didn't wait for my response. He turned his back to me, lowering his voice and walking several paces away, creating an illusion of privacy. It was clearly a pre-arranged call, likely from Tiffany or a collaborator, designed to give him an update or perhaps just to eat up more time. This was the window I needed. Calmly, deliberately, I reached into my simple canvas tote bag and took out my own phone, an older model smartphone, nothing flashy, perfectly in keeping with my simple persona. My fingers, steady and sure, navigated to my text messages. I had composed the message earlier that morning, saving it as a draft. It was addressed to a single recipient, Mr. Henderson, the head of the private security firm I had placed on retainer weeks ago, the same firm that had installed the upgraded security system at my house. The message was brief, coded and precise. Execute Protocol Nightingale. Confirm activation. I pressed send. The message vanished into the ether. Protocol Nightingale. It sounded rather gentle, named after the famous nurse. It was anything but. It was the command code to remotely activate the final layer of my home's defense system, the internal, floor-mounted steel security bolts on all exterior doors. Deadbolts operated by keys from the outside. These bolts operated only from the inside, or via my specific encrypted command signal. Once activated, they turned my sturdy bungalow into a veritable fortress. No key, no locksmith, no crowbar could open those doors from the outside. I put my phone back in my bag just as Kevin ended his call, his face now flushed with a mixture of relief and impatience. "Sorry about that, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Crisis averted. Where were we? Oh yeah, the old tire swing." He started walking again, his pace slightly faster now, his chatter even more relentless. He was nearing the end of his mission, eager to deliver me back to the vicinity of my house, secure in the knowledge that his wife had successfully completed her objective. A moment later, my own phone vibrated silently in my bag. I didn't need to look at it. I knew what it would say. Protocol Nightingale activated, perimeter secure. Standing by. The trap was set. The bait had been taken, and the architect of the scheme was about to find herself locked out not just by a key, but by solid, unyielding steel. The quiet principal had just fortified her castle. While Kevin was sweating his way through his performance in the park, Tiffany was executing her part of the plan with the cool, predatory efficiency of a seasoned real estate closer. She arrived on my quiet, tree-lined street, just before 2:11 p.m., parking her gleaming white luxury SUV a block away, a subtle attempt at discretion that was completely undermined by the vehicle itself. She walked briskly towards my bungalow, her high heels clicking assertively on the sidewalk. Her face wore an expression of smug, triumphant satisfaction. This was it. The final move in her long game. The acquisition of the asset she felt was rightfully hers, or at least rightfully not mine. The locksmith van was already parked down the street. As arranged, a burly man in greasy overalls met her at my front gate. Tiffany, ever the brand manager, likely gave him a dazzling dismissive smile. "You're here for the Jackson residence?" she probably asked, not using my name, already claiming ownership. "Excellent. Just the front and back doors. Standard deadbolt replacement. Needs to be quick and quiet. The previous owner, well, let's just say security is a concern. A little lied to grease the wheels, to make her hostile takeover seem like a prudent safety measure." While the locksmith set to work, his drill whirring softly in the quiet afternoon air, Tiffany likely took a moment to survey her prize. She probably walked around the perimeter of the house, her sharp eyes assessing the value, not of the memories held within, but of the land it sat upon. She might have pictured the charming, slightly overgrown garden replaced by a minimalist landscape of white pebbles and ornamental grasses. She might have envisioned the sturdy brick bungalow bulldozed to make way for one of the soulless modern boxes she specialized in selling. Her phone would have buzzed. A text message. Perhaps from Kevin, confirming the distraction was working. Perhaps from Jamal, offering encouragement for Operation Secure Asset, as she might have jokingly or not so jokingly called it in her texts. She might have even snapped a quick selfie in front of the house, a triumphant before picture for her private collection, captioning it mentally, "Out with the old, in with the new." Her confidence would have been absolute. Her plan was perfect. Her mother-in-law was a naive, easily managed fool. Her husband was a willing, if weak accomplice. The locksmith was efficient. The house, the asset, the key to unlocking hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential profit was about to be hers. She imagined the moment Brenda returned from her walk, confused, fumbling with her old keys, finding they no longer worked. She pictured the feigned shock, the crocodile tears, the gentle but firm explanation that perhaps it was time, after all, to consider one of those lovely retirement communities. It would be smooth, seamless, and ultimately Brenda would have no choice but to comply. Tiffany would be the concerned, dutiful daughter-in-law, sadly but responsibly managing a difficult situation. Her hands would be clean, her conscience, such as it was, clear, her bank account significantly fatter. The locksmith finished the front door first, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He handed Tiffany a small, shiny set of new keys. The keys to her future, the keys to the kingdom, or so she believed. This was the moment Tiffany had been planning, anticipating, perhaps even fantasizing about, for months. The culmination of her scheme, the satisfying click of a key turning in a lock, symbolizing her final, absolute victory over the inconvenient, embarrassing presence of her mother-in-law. She took the new keys from the locksmith, the metal cool and solid in her hand. She selected the key for the front door deadbolt and slid it into the brand new lock. It turned smoothly, silently, a perfect fit. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. It was done. Easy. She pushed the door, expecting it to swing open, revealing the familiar, slightly musty interior of the house she now controlled. The door didn't budge. Not even a millimeter. It felt solid, immovable, as if she were pushing against a brick wall. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Had the locksmith made a mistake? Had he installed it incorrectly? "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice sharp with annoyance. The locksmith, who had moved to the back of the house to start on the second door, came back around, wiping sweat from his brow. "Problem? No ma'am, lock's working fine. Turned smooth, didn't it?" "Yes, it turned," Tiffany snapped, "but the door won't open." She pushed again, harder this time, putting her shoulder into it. The door remained stubbornly, unnervingly solid. It didn't rattle, it didn't give, it felt bolted. A knot of unease began to form in her stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't part of the plan. "Maybe something's blocking it from the inside," the locksmith suggested, peering through the small peephole, though it was impossible to see anything clearly. "Blocking it?" Tiffany scoffed. "How? The house is empty. My mother-in-law is out for the afternoon." Panic began to bubble beneath her irritation. She ran around to the back door, where the locksmith had just finished installing the second new lock. She snatched the key from him, jammed it into the lock, and turned it. Again it turned smoothly. She pushed the back door. The same result. Solid, immovable, bolted shut from the inside. The smug confidence that had carried her through the morning drained away, replaced by a rising tide of frantic, confused panic. How was this possible? The house was empty. She knew it was empty. Kevin had her mother firmly under control in the park. She rattled the doorknob, pushing and pulling with increasing desperation. The sturdy oak door didn't even vibrate. It was like trying to push over a mountain. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at the locksmith, her eyes wide with a dawning terrible fear. "What's going on?" The locksmith, a simple working man, just shrugged, clearly sensing that he was caught in the middle of something far more complicated and potentially illegal than a simple lock change. "Beats me, lady," he mumbled, already packing up his tools, eager to get away. "Looks like you're locked out good and proper." Locked out. The words echoed in the quiet afternoon air. She, Tiffany Jackson, the master manipulator, the queen of the hostile takeover, was locked out of her own prize, and she had absolutely no idea how or why. The perfect plan had just hit a solid steel wall. What Tiffany, in her arrogant underestimation of me, could never have conceived was that my quiet life did not equate to a naive or unprepared one. 40 years as a principal, dealing with everything from budget crises and bomb threats, to manipulative parents trying to game the system, had taught me the fundamental importance of security and contingency planning. You don't manage a building full of adolescents and ambitious educators without developing a healthy dose of strategic paranoia. My suspicions about Tiffany's intentions hadn't just led me to create Protocol Nightingale. They had prompted a much earlier, more fundamental upgrade to my home's security. Weeks ago, long before the birthday lunch, long before the overheard ultimatum, acting purely on that persistent nagging instinct that Tiffany's interest in my house was becoming predatory. I had made a quiet, significant investment. I contacted Henderson Security, not some local alarm company but a high-end firm that specialized in protecting executives and securing sensitive facilities. I didn't tell them my concerns were domestic. I framed it as a desire for enhanced peace of mind in my retirement, citing rising crime rates in the newly gentrifying neighborhood, a plausible if slightly exaggerated concern. Mr. Henderson himself, a discreet and highly professional former Secret Service agent, oversaw the assessment. He recommended a comprehensive upgrade, new pick-resistant deadbolts on all doors. Yes, reinforced steel door jambs to prevent kick-ins. Certainly, but his key recommendation, the one that resonated with my own cautious nature, was the installation of internal floor-mounted high-security slide bolts on all exterior doors. These weren't ordinary chain locks or simple slide bolts. These were commercial-grade hardened steel bars that slotted into reinforced receivers drilled directly into the floor joists. They were virtually invisible from the outside. They could only be engaged or disengaged from the inside, either manually or for an extra layer of control, remotely via a secure encrypted signal linked only to my personal devices. Henderson called them Class 3 barriers, designed to withstand forced entry attempts far beyond what any standard residential lock could handle. Once these are engaged, Dr. Jackson, Henderson had explained, his voice calm and serious, nothing short of a battering ram or explosives is getting through that door. It turns your home into a safe room. The cost was substantial, far beyond what someone living on my perceived pension could afford. I paid for it instantly, electronically from one of my hidden investment accounts. Henderson raised a discreet eyebrow but asked no questions. His business was security, not curiosity. The installation was done quickly, quietly over 2 afternoons while Tiffany and Kevin were at work. The technicians were professionals, leaving no trace of their presence. So when Tiffany stood on my porch pushing against a door that refused to budge, she wasn't just pushing against wood and a standard lock. She was pushing against solid floor-bolted steel, engaged remotely by a single silent text message I had sent from a park bench miles away. She thought she was merely locked out by a key she didn't possess. The reality was far more absolute. She was barred by a physical impassable barrier. A barrier erected by the very foresight and quiet resourcefulness she had so foolishly underestimated. She hadn't just failed to pick the lock. She had come up against the fortress walls and found them utterly, completely impregnable. Standing on my porch, staring at the impassive, unyielding wood of my front door, Tiffany's mind raced. This was impossible. Houses didn't just lock themselves from the inside. Had she been wrong? Had Brenda somehow doubled back? Was she inside, listening, laughing? But no, Kevin had her. He'd texted just 10 minutes ago. They were looking at the ducks by the pond, Brenda seemingly oblivious. Her frustration curdled into genuine heart-pounding panic. Her perfect, seamless plan was unraveling. The locksmith was packing his van, clearly eager to distance himself from this increasingly bizarre situation. She was alone, locked out, with a set of useless new keys in her trembling hand. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline. She dialed Kevin's number, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Pick up, pick up, pick up, she muttered, pacing frantically back and forth on the small porch like a caged animal. Meanwhile, miles away in Willow Creek Park, Kevin was in the middle of an excruciatingly detailed, entirely fabricated anecdote about falling out of the old tire swing. Brenda sat beside him on the bench, nodding politely, her expression one of mild, grandmotherly interest, while inwardly she was tracking the minutes, picturing the scene unfolding at her house with cold, precise clarity. Kevin's phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the caller ID, Tiffany. Relief washed over his face. She was calling to confirm the mission was accomplished. He excused himself quickly. Sorry, Mom. Tiff probably needs me to pick up milk or something on the way home. Be right back. He stepped away, turning his back, and answered the call. His voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. Hey babe. All good. Locks changed. Tiffany's voice came through the line, not triumphant, but high-pitched and hysterical. Kevin, it's locked. From the inside. Both doors. The new keys work, but the doors won't open. They feel bolted. What is going on? Kevin's own relief instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold wave of panic. Bolted? What are you talking about? How can they be bolted? She's here with me. I don't know. Tiffany shrieked, tears of frustration now audible in her voice. Maybe she has some secret locks? Maybe a neighbor saw me and called her. I don't know. But I can't get in. The locksmith is leaving. What do I do, Kevin? What do I do? Kevin's mind raced, but his thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and incompetence. He was a follower, not a leader. He had been executing Tiffany's plan, relying on her ruthlessness and confidence. Now that the plan had failed, he had no idea how to react. Okay, calm down, he stammered, trying to project an authority he didn't feel, acutely aware that Brenda was just a few yards away, possibly listening. Did you try jiggling the handle? Jiggling the handle? Tiffany screeched, her voice incredulous. Kevin, I'm telling you, it's bolted like Fort Knox. Jiggling isn't going to do anything. Well, are you sure it's the right key? He offered lamely. Yes, I'm sure it's the right key. The locksmith just gave it to me. He can't get in either. He's leaving now. Kevin, this is a disaster. What if she comes back? What do we say? Kevin glanced nervously over his shoulder at Brenda, who was calmly watching the ducks on the pond, the picture of serene innocence. She's fine, he whispered frantically into the phone. She doesn't suspect a thing. Just get out of there, Tiff. Abort mission. Come back to the park. We'll figure something out later. Just act normal. Act normal? Tiffany sounded apoplectic. Kevin, I just tried to steal your mother's house and failed. How am I supposed to act normal? Just do it. Kevin hissed, desperation making him cruel. Get back here now. He hung up, his hand trembling. He took a deep breath, plastered a weak, shaky smile on his face, and walked back towards the park bench, towards the mother whose quiet strength he had just so catastrophically betrayed, utterly unaware that she knew everything. The distraction maneuver had failed, the invasion had been repelled, and the counterattack was imminent. Tiffany stood on the porch, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dead air where Kevin's panicked voice had been. Act normal. The sheer idiotic uselessness of his command sent a fresh wave of fury through her. Act normal. After committing what amounted to attempted grand larceny against her own mother-in-law, she looked at the solid, unyielding front door. Her mind, usually so sharp and strategic when it came to closing a deal, was now a chaotic mess of fear and rage. How had this happened? How had the simple, naive old woman outsmarted her? Her first instinct was escalation. Break a window? The thought flashed through her mind, tempting in its directness, but the image of shattering glass, the inevitable alarm system, surely the old woman had one, the nosy neighbors peering out from behind their curtains. It was too risky. Vandalism charges, police reports, the potential for exposure was too high. This entire operation was predicated on stealth, on maintaining the illusion of plausible deniability. Call the police herself? Claim she was locked out of her mother-in-law's house? That felt even more dangerous. What reason could she possibly give for changing the locks without the owner's permission? The story would unravel under the first hint of official scrutiny. She looked desperately at the locksmith, who was now loading the last of his tools into his van, his face averted, clearly wanting no part of this domestic drama. Wait, she called out. Can't you drill the lock? Get me inside? The locksmith shook his head, not even looking at her. Not without proof of ownership or a police order, ma'am, he mumbled, slamming the van door shut. Looks like you need a different kind of professional help. He got into the driver's seat and drove away, leaving her utterly alone on the porch. Defeated, humiliated, furious. She stared at the house, the asset she had been so close to securing. It stood there quiet, solid, mocking her with its impenetrable security. She felt a surge of pure childish rage. She wanted to scream, to kick the door, to throw something. But the real estate agent in her, the part that always calculated risk and reward, took over. Creating a scene here would achieve nothing but attract unwanted attention. Kevin was right about one thing. She needed to retreat. She needed to get back to the park, back to Brenda, and pretend that nothing had happened. She needed to act normal. She smoothed down her expensive dress, took a deep shaky breath, then forced her features into a semblance of composure. She walked, stiffly at first, then with increasing speed, back towards her gleaming white SUV parked down the street. As she drove away, she glanced back at the house in her rearview mirror. It looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, a simple, sturdy, unremarkable bungalow. But now she knew it was different. It was a fortress, and behind its quiet facade, her simple, naive mother-in-law was something else entirely. Something unexpected. Something dangerous. Willow Creek Park, which had seemed like a tedious, necessary holding pen just an hour ago, now felt like a potential minefield. Tiffany parked her SUV haphazardly, half on the curb, and practically ran towards the pond where Kevin had said they would be. She spotted them immediately, sitting calmly on a shaded park bench, watching the ducks glide across the water. Brenda, in her simple dress, looked exactly the same, quiet, serene, perhaps a little tired from the walk. Kevin looked awful. He was pale, sweating slightly despite the cool afternoon air, and his forced smile when he saw Tiffany approaching was a ghastly, unconvincing rictus. Tiffany ignored Brenda completely. Her focus was entirely on Kevin, on telegraphing the disaster with her eyes, on demanding answers he clearly didn't have. She ran the last few yards, her high heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, and grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "Kevin," she gasped, genuinely out of breath now, her voice a ragged, panicked whisper. "We need to go, now." Kevin looked from his wife's frantic face to his mother's unnervingly calm one. He was caught in the crossfire. A weak and terrified soldier caught between two opposing generals. "Tiff, what happened? What's wrong?" "Something went wrong," Tiffany hissed, her eyes darting towards Brenda as if expecting her to suddenly reveal superpowers. "Terribly wrong. Your mother—" She stopped abruptly, her voice caught in her throat, because it was only then in her panic and her fury that she truly looked at me. And she saw it. She saw the absence of confusion. She saw the lack of surprise. She saw the quiet, knowing calm in my eyes. The serene, almost amused detachment of someone who was not a victim of the chaos but its architect. The pieces, the impossible, terrifying pieces, began to click into place in her mind. The internal bolts, the perfect timing of Kevin's phone call, my unnerving smile when she delivered the ultimatum, my utter lack of surprise now. It wasn't that something went wrong with her plan. It was that everything had gone exactly according to my plan. Her breath hitched. A small involuntary gasp escaped her lips. Her face, already pale with fury and fear, seemed to drain of all remaining color. She looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time, not as the simple naive mother-in-law but as an opponent, a formidable, intelligent and utterly ruthless opponent who had just played her like a cheap fiddle. The gasp was the sound of her entire world, her entire sense of control, her entire belief in her own superiority, imploding in a single, catastrophic moment of realization. She had walked into a trap, and the quiet, unassuming old woman sitting calmly on the park bench was the one who had sprung it. I watched the cascade of understanding, fear and dawning horror wash over Tiffany's face. The performance was over. The masks were off. It was time for the debriefing. I stood up slowly from the park bench, brushing a non-existent piece of lint from my simple dress. My movements were deliberate, calm, the movements of someone in complete control of the situation. Kevin flinched slightly as I stood, as if expecting me to finally unleash the fury I had been suppressing. Tiffany just stared, her eyes wide with a kind of terrified, paralyzed fascination. "Problems at the house, Tiffany dear?" I asked, my voice quiet, conversational but laced with an unmistakable edge of cold, hard steel. "You seem distressed." She couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a small jerky movement. "Perhaps," I continued smoothly, "you encountered some difficulty with the new Class 3 internal security deadbolts I had installed last week. Henderson Security does excellent work. Highly recommended. They turn a simple bungalow into quite the fortress." I let the words hang in the air. Internal deadbolts, installed last week. I was letting her know piece by chilling piece, that this was not an accident. This was premeditated. I had anticipated her move. Kevin made a small choked sound. He looked from me to Tiffany, his face a mask of dawning, sickening comprehension. He was finally understanding the depth of the game he had been unwittingly playing, and the side he had chosen. Tiffany found her voice. A thin, reedy whisper. How did you know?" "Know what, dear?" I asked innocently. "That you would attempt to illegally seize my property while your husband distracted me with a forced walk down memory lane. Let's just say 35 years as a principal develops certain predictive skills. One learns to recognize patterns of entitled, manipulative behavior." I paused, then added, my voice dropping slightly, becoming even quieter, even more dangerous. "Or perhaps," I mused, tapping my chin thoughtfully, "it was the new security cameras. The ones Henderson installed along with the bolts, discreet little things, but excellent resolution, high definition even in low light. I reached into my canvas tote bag and took out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times, then held it up, angling the screen so they could both see it clearly. It was displaying a crystal clear image, a still frame captured from my front porch camera about an hour and a half ago. It showed Tiffany, her face beaming with smug confidence, handing a set of keys to the burly locksmith, who was standing beside his van. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. I received a notification on my phone about suspicious activity detected on my property about an hour ago, I explained calmly. Motion sensor triggered the recording. Fascinating footage. It clearly shows unauthorized individuals tampering with my locks. Attempted breaking and entering, I believe, is the legal term. I let them absorb the image, the undeniable, irrefutable proof of their conspiracy. I've already forwarded the complete video file to my lawyer, I added casually, as if discussing the weather. Mr. Abernathy, top man for property disputes and related matters. Just as a precaution, of course. One can't be too careful these days. The color drained completely from Kevin's face. Tiffany looked like she was about to vomit. The word lawyer, the phrase breaking and entering, the existence of video evidence, these were not concepts their carefully curated world was equipped to handle. They had thought they were executing a clever private maneuver. They had just realized they had committed a potentially criminal act, and their victim had it all on tape. The quiet, naive mother-in-law had just revealed herself to be a meticulous, evidence-gathering prosecutor, and the trial was just beginning. They stood frozen, trapped in the harsh glare of the video evidence on my phone screen. The potential legal ramifications, breaking and entering, conspiracy, elder abuse. My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, had a very creative mind, were clearly cycling through their panicked thoughts. Tiffany looked less like a high-powered real estate agent and more like a cornered animal. Kevin looked like he was about to faint. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the full weight of their predicament settle upon them. Then I delivered the final coup de grace. But Tiffany, I said, my voice softening slightly, taking on a tone of almost pitying reasonableness. Honestly, all this fuss about changing the locks, it seems like a rather pointless exercise now, doesn't it? She stared at me, her eyes wide with confusion. Pointless? How could securing the asset be pointless? I mean, I continued, with a small dismissive shrug, why go to all the trouble of illegally changing the locks on a house that no longer belongs to me? The words dropped into the charged air like stones into a silent pond. No longer belongs to me. Kevin frowned, shaking his head slightly, as if trying to clear water from his ears. Mom, what are you talking about? Of course it's your house. Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, Kevin, I replied, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. It was my house, my beloved home for 40 years. But circumstances change, priorities shift. I looked directly at Tiffany, whose face was now a mask of utter uncomprehending bewilderment. You were right about one thing, Tiffany, I conceded, allowing a small sad smile to touch my lips. It was becoming a bit much for me to manage alone, and the property values have skyrocketed. It represented a significant amount of trapped equity. I used her own transactional language, turning her weapon back on her. So, I concluded, my voice clear and unwavering, I decided to make a change. I finalized the transfer yesterday afternoon. All the legal paperwork is signed, notarized, and filed with the county registrar, as of approximately 4:00 p.m. yesterday. The house, the land, everything, it isn't mine anymore, hasn't been for almost 24 hours. Transferred, Kevin whispered, the word barely audible. Transferred to who? Not to you, Kevin. If that's what you're hoping, I said, cutting off any potential flicker of desperate misplaced hope. No, I decided it was time to give back to the institution that gave me so much throughout my career. I paused, savoring the final devastating reveal. I gifted it, I announced, my voice ringing with a quiet, clear finality. Irrevocably, free and clear, to the Northwood Middle School Alumni Trust, an organization I established last month specifically for this purpose. The entire property, lock, stock and barrel, will be used to fund scholarships for underprivileged children in the district. Kids who actually appreciate the value of a solid foundation, unlike some people I know. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of utter, complete and irreversible defeat. Tiffany's dream, her prize, the asset she had schemed and lied and betrayed her own husband to acquire, had vanished. It had been given away, placed forever beyond her grasp, used for the very purpose she despised, helping people who weren't rich. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. The real estate agent, the closer, the master of the deal, had just been foreclosed upon permanently and with devastating, elegant precision. The full weight of the situation seemed to land on Tiffany and Kevin simultaneously. It wasn't just that their plan had failed, it was that their entire premise was flawed. They had been scheming to steal a house that was no longer mine to be stolen. They had committed attempted breaking and entering, documented on video, for absolutely nothing. The sheer humiliating absurdity of it, combined with the loss of the potential windfall the house represented, was a blow from which their already fractured relationship would likely never recover. Tiffany made a small choked sound, a strangled sob of pure, unadulterated despair. Her face crumpled, the mask of ambition and control finally shattering, revealing the terrified, insecure woman beneath. Kevin just stood there swaying slightly, looking utterly lost. He looked at his wife, then at me, then back at his wife, as if trying to understand how his life had derailed so completely, so catastrophically. He had followed her lead, betrayed his own mother, and it had all been for less than nothing. I didn't wait for their reaction, for the inevitable explosion of tears or accusations. My part in this drama was over. The lesson had been delivered. The consequences were theirs to navigate. I glanced at my watch, a simple, elegant timepiece George had given me years ago. "Ah," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "My car should be here." As if on cue, a discreet black sedan, noticeably more luxurious than my usual ride, but still understated compared to Jamal's usual monstrosities, pulled up silently to the curb at the edge of the park. It wasn't the Escalade from the previous plan, this was my actual car service, arranged for my real departure. The driver, a polite young man I recognized, got out and opened the rear door for me. I turned to leave. "Mom, wait." Kevin's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Where are you going? You can't just... Where will you live?" He still hadn't fully processed the implications. I turned back one last time, standing by the open car door. I looked directly at my son, my heart aching with a mixture of pity and hard-won resolve. "I'm going home, Kevin," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "to the lovely two-bedroom condo I bought downtown last month, overlooking the river, plenty of room for visitors." I paused, letting the information sink in. Real visitors, that is. I got into the car. The seat was comfortable, supportive, the air inside was cool and quiet. I left the door open for a final moment. Tiffany was still sobbing, a broken figure on the park grass. Kevin looked utterly shell-shocked, his world completely upended. My final words were not directed at Tiffany. She was, for now, beyond reach. My final words were for my son. "Some investments, Kevin," I said softly, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air, "are about property, about securing assets. Others are about character, about building something that lasts." I looked from his pale, devastated face to Tiffany's crumpled form. "It seems," I concluded, my voice filled not with anger but with a profound final sadness, "you both chose poorly." With that, I nodded to the driver. He closed my door with a soft, solid click. The black sedan pulled away smoothly from the curb, leaving them standing shell-shocked in the park, surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. As the car drove away, I didn't look back. I looked forward towards the river, towards my new home, towards the quiet, peaceful, and utterly independent future I had secured for myself. The house was gone, gifted away, but I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my dignity, my peace, and my freedom, and that was an inheritance no one could ever take away.